and we are recording. So, Jason, it's okay to call you Jason instead of Renegade?
Yes, sir. Yeah, it's all good, Ramon. Sounds great.
Right. So, we can talk about your Dr. May, or we can continue on with what you were talking about earlier, Nick. We weren't recording that, so might be a little bit of repetition. There was also some other topic that had come up. What was it that I was going to bring up? Nick, do you remember?
Well, I've been sort of firmly on Fourier transforms and ephemerides at the moment, and then of course,
let's just start there. You guys can. We were talking about memory entropy and Fourier transforms. So why don't we do that? Maybe that'll lead into the other discussion. At some point, I'll have to pull the patient's needles, but then other than that, I've got plenty of time.
Well, they're definitely a fundamental tool if you ever want to pull apart frequencies that have many frequencies on top of one another. That's the formula to unmix the paint bucket.
So why don't you give people you're new on the show. Why don't you give people a little bit of background, some of the sauce of what you do, and I mean you're quite prolific in your studying, researching. I see you, you're sharing and collaborating, and so just maybe give people a little introduction to you.
Well, I'm an aerial technician. I've been building cell phone towers for about 12 years here in Canada. I was injured on the job here a little while ago. I completely severed my tailbone and had a lot of spinal issues. So I'm not climbing right now, but luckily I got some good insurance. So I got a lot of time to study and read and all that fun stuff. But definitely the Fourier transform is integral to our society. It's built into literally like the cell phone in your hand is running that mathematical formula to be able to transmit the sound into light, into electrical pulses, back into light, and then back. It probably goes. My voice enters the speaker and your end. So once again, error correcting codes are integral too, because there is a lot of data that's lost and there's a lot of radio noise within the system itself. But it's fundamental too, if you look into this stuff really deeply, that's just the whole idea of rotating celestial bodies. A lot of these three body problems and multiple body problems can be solved in terms of frequency rather than trying to think about mass and gravity.
And that's an interesting solution because Nick, Andy, and I are always talking about how are we going to go back and simulate this solar system breakdown that we had. And maybe Fourier transforms represent a way for us to sort of apply Johannes Alphen's approach, looking at the preservation of the angular momentum and the total energy of the system. Of course, he thought that it was accreting, because that was the standard theory at the time. And then he was looking at it from his MHD perspective, and then finding where all of these planets were holding enough energy out at their particular distances to balance the equation. What if there was a way to step things back, first looking at the frequencies that they currently inhabit, and then how those systems would be conserved, and then using Fourier transforms to go backwards and sort of a reverse Fourier transform, finding out where these objects would have been in space.
100%.
Interesting. I don't know. I don't know if it's possible. I mean, I personally wrote it off as too chaotic to really know the answer. We might be able to get some kind of relative.
No. There's been a massive there's been a massive history of tracking this recently, and now with geostationary satellites. I just came across recently, of course, someone to prove gravitational waves through the ether with the Schnell effect. There is there are a lot of institutions running ephemerides because it's a way of basically describing the full circuit of the solar system in one formula. I know it's again we're getting back to a mathematical formula, but it's being able to express it in a combination.
But my concern is, and I'll show you. Are you guys seeing the screen? Should have it sharing.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So I was analyzing these, and in particular, there was a set that interested me. These guys. Okay. Now, let me pull open the file. And I was doing the diameter ratios and then ratioing them to each other. And here's the problem. Venus is showing up. If you take the big sphere and then you ratio it with the small sphere, you roughly have Venus to Mars, like very, very close relationship. Okay. Let's see here. This one. Okay. The problem is the middle one, you get a ratio number that does not it does not have an easy solution. I have to go back and the papers are at the house, obviously. But I mean, maybe it's Triton, but it might be a completely new body that is between the size of Mars and Venus.
It's funny you say the name Triton. Are you familiar with the musical term known as a tritone?
I've heard of it. I'm not a
Yes,
musician.
I am. Yeah.
It's an extremely rare ratio that is absolutely obscure, and it's two frequencies that combine to create a third distinct frequency due to the obscure nature of the ratio.
It's known as the devil's tone.
That's right. And it's very hard to produce properly, but when it's done, it really invokes a lot of emotion.
Yeah, I'm onto that as well, Jay. I really am. And you know where I first came across that? I was studying the triptych of Hieronymus Bosch, the third one, and there's a guy with his head stuck in a harp, and he's got his ass. You can see on his ass there's some music written, and if you that music has been recently translated, and someone's played the song that's written on his bum, and it's actually that tritone. These two, and it's the most discordant chord that we can make, and I think it actually happens in our solar system sometimes. It would be quite interesting to track that.
I'm not making the proposition that this 1.28 is a tritone, but I am saying that none of these other bodies, as you can see, all these other bodies I put in, there really aren't any that give a proper relationship, indicating probably this sphere was destroyed, the middle one. However, the work is not conclusive, right? And I'm also concerned about using images on these. I'm thinking about, flying down there and actually measuring the circumferences, and then from the circumferences getting the like doing an X cross circumference, and then getting their radiuses or diameters in this case from that.
Yeah, it's
But
hard to work out perspective from these images. It's very hard to work, get an accurate relative
correct.
relative dimensions.
But I thought it was interesting that right away the large to the small uh, reflected an excellent relationship between Venus and Mars. So, but back to the central point is if a body this size was destroyed, and it isn't Triton because we know where Triton is, however, Neptune going in retrograde orbit. But if there was a body this size that was destroyed, or even if it was smaller than Mars, I reckon it would seem to me to be very hard to put back the original solar system, even with the gas giants. And I'm not so sure, by the way, that if we just add the masses of the 4 gas giants back together, that is equivalent to the mass of the sun, because I am a bit on this idea of charge, that the electrical state of the star is greater than the sum of its atoms, if you know what I mean. There will be a greater gravitic presence to the star as in its active mode than if you just put its atoms back together. And also, we don't know how much material was siphoned off of Shamash back to Sol when it came in and electrically stressed the environment. So I'm just not so sure that we could put it back together. But if you're right about the Fourier transform being able to take the motions and the various properties of the bodies and then approximate them with frequency, theoretically, it seems like we'd be able to go in the reverse direction.
It would be an intense amount of data points, that's for sure.
It would. Yes, that's my concern about it.
Yeah.
How to even do it. But maybe it would represent an easier way to do these simulations, back to the main point, rather than running lots of equations in parallel that do kinetic, angular momentum, gravity, electromagnetism, both electrical and magnetism, running on a system that's trying to basically do simulations like Space Engine, and doing that all in kind of a real time while there's these wobbles going, because Universal Sandbox 2 doesn't have all the wobbles, so people aren't aware of them.
Yeah, I mean, it's coming back to this again. It's the data structure of the ephemerides. What they've done is take millions of data points. Now I'm at the moment I'm looking at the NASA data sets, and they've taken millions of data points, and over the last sort of 20 years they've released different ephemerides, and the last one. These are right. We've got Horizons, and the Horizons service offers comprehensive access to the positions and other information on solar system objects, including the sun, planetary barycenters, planetary satellites, asteroids, comets, Lagrange points, selected spacecraft in a variety of forms and formats. It is suggested that it is the suggested means of obtaining such information for a wide range of analysis. Note that information on Pluto may be found on Planetary Orbits page, and that information is for known Kuiper objects. Blah de blah. Anyway, so what they've used formula for plotting approximate positions with this data. Now these how approximate they are. They're the Keplerian, basically Keplerian adjusted data structures. So once you've fed your data points into this structure, it merely It merely changes the waveforms that it knocks out, which it can then use repeatedly in different phases. Now, these ephemerides are, like I said, they're updated very regularly. And it's the JPL, the Joint Propulsion Laboratory, that released them, which is a bit of a, I don't know, it's a bit of a shame. Well, let's see what it says about them. Planets.
Why is that a bit of a shame?
Sorry?
Why is that a bit of a shame?
Well, the only thing about NASA is I don't trust most of the data that they release.
Oh,
So,
gotcha.
So I'm just worried that if these ephemerides have been kind of transmuted to muffle some signals that might really stand out. But anyway, there's a lot of historical ones that you can start building them up for. And like I suggest, it's a matter of doing this using neural networks. And so we're just completely eliminating loss in our signal all the time. So we've got a very good prediction a prediction rate of where these planets are at what point, under what circumstances. But yeah, I think the essential thing is to rebuild an ephemerides built from past data, that when we set it forward and look at, let's say, a feature that happens in 1,000 years or 2,000 years or whatever point we want to look at, we know where the planetary forces will be aligned at that particular point, and we can, we can start correlating some points in the past with events, hopefully. Now this is when we can also identify these Schnell effects in the ephemerides. We should be able to identify these in the time elements of the Fourier transform data as well, very clearly, and find out what energetic forces have changed, have flipped from one planet to the next, etc., because of the changes in their rotations or orbits. I think they'll correlate. What about you, Jay? What about you? What's your opinion on that?
Well, to be honest, this seems to be kind of the route that Kepler was taking originally, but he didn't have electricity. The only waves he had was sound. So Kepler did a lot of work with the music of the spheres, and that's kind of where that came from. But had that man had the idea of electromagnetism, a whole different science would have been born from it. Exactly the direction you guys are heading, really.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it should be fairly easy to model the fields between the intensity of fields between a number of bodies within a shell, well, in shell layers, really. I think we should be able to try and figure out this this planetary circuit electrically.
Theoretically, he could have had it, but I would say there was probably a language issue, because Gilbert,
definitely.
Gilbert published in 1600, and that's Johannes Kepler. As I thought, Johannes Kepler, however, was German.
There's language issues.
I think Gilbert was in Latin or Spanish. Let's see here. Yeah, let's see here. This is the cover, looking like Latin. It might be Italian.
It's going to go down with me, dog.
Obviously, Kepler was being German. Not exactly. But the chances are good he would have found a way to read this. I wonder, though, how difficult it would have been to get a copy of De Magnete.
Very hard, because I mean, you got to think of the day and age. A lot of this stuff was heretical thinking, so it was a cult and hidden, or oculist, hidden behind eye doctor personas and all kinds of weird stuff these guys did to hide what they were doing from the church.
Yep. In the printing
Yeah,
press.
entirely. And people like Newton, who had access to any kind of astronomical records, probably the whole corpus that existed in Britain at Cambridge, and he read it all, and he was highly sceptical of the history, basically, purely because he looked at ephemerides and said, no, this wasn't happening then.
Yep. De Magnete was printed in Latin, first edition, second edition. I mean, there were multiple editions here. Of course, third edition came in after he was dead, after Kepler was dead. Now, I contend there's no way that Newton did not know about Gilbert's work, and certainly, he had access to Kepler. So the question is, why did he come up with this gravitic system when he didn't really even need it? He could have just used the laws of motion themselves. Newton, I love him, but sometimes I wish I had a hold of him.
Well, I think as well as the ellipses, he'd worked out that the planet actually slowed as it got to its perihelion and aphelion, and then speeds up all the way to its perihelion. And so it was working. I think it was working that out as well, which, because it's a rotated ellipse. It's not a pure ellipse, of course. It's a spiral. And I think that's where he had to find the extra force, really. It might, is that possibly it?
Keep talking. I'm just adding in here. We have our historical model page, and I am just going in and adding these fellows that we talking about. Keep going.
Right. I can't remember where we were. Sorry. Lost my track. I was just making myself a coffee.
You guys were talking Fourier transform.
Get into May Wan Ho's work. She did some phenomenal work on the physics of organisms and how really at the molecular level everything is electrified plasma. There's no other term for it. And it seems to be, she uses the word nanospace rather than quantum or counterspatial or any of the other million terms used for the ether, which is all the same thing. Once again, a language problem.
I'm not so convinced that the counter space is the ether, but I have a different understanding of the counter space than I think a lot of people are using it for. But continue.
Yeah, May Wan Ho, though, she did, like I say, phenomenal work. I forget the Japanese scientist there that was doing the work with emotions and water and being able to form perfect crystals when you're kindness to the water. And she was really a pioneer in that type of field as well, because there's something to it. And especially when you think that we're mostly water, our environment is mostly water. Well, things are going to get pretty chaotic when all the water gets angry at the other water. And the world's pretty chaotic now. It's there's a necessity to bring back a little bit of spirituality into science as well, and to realize that we're one with nature.
Oh.
The mechanism.
Somebody's been maybe getting a little peek into my paper there, the current one, or maybe we're just synchronistic. So I will.
Ramon, you're onto something there, and it's necessary, because I am starting to think that Miss Ho might be right, that thermodynamics is a cyclical system and not linear. And
Correct.
really, it is emerging consciousness that we're all a part of. It's the universe viewing itself from the inside out. And it's exactly what the ancients carved in rocks telling us it was. It's just they didn't have the language that we now possess. So they use symbols because the symbols don't change. But yeah, no, it's really a shame that she passed away because she was an integral part of the future, some of the work she was doing, and her ability to cross boundaries between biology and physics and geometry and all kinds of fields, because that's really what's needed too, is we've compartmentalized so bad with everything. The system itself is rooted in compartmentalization for control reasons, and it's holding everyone back.
I
I
agree.
agree.
I agree. I think most of the world's experts and academics can only speak to others of their own disciplines. It's I mean even the maths they use is a different notation from different areas of engineering. And all right, I think it's fundamentally important that we've got people, interdisciplinary people, who can communicate at a layman's level, and hopefully get some real experts in, people who've used these data sets, and I will definitely get the latest data sets and start tracking these planets myself rather than using NASA sets. Um, there's plenty of satellites that we can hook up onto that are probably pointed at these planets, and we can get accurate, really, um, maybe some decent data to predict. Um, I mean, it's a massive job. I mean, the whole of NASA's rotten doing it, but it's a massive job. But I don't think it's as complicated as what you might think to train a neural network to suck in various sets of data that happen within that time series.
Well,
Um,
I would instead of programming that, I would like to see us begin the process of creating these what I call in my new, not in the MIM where I was just mentioning, but the new Conquering the Solar System, which is getting very close to being ready. I talk about the AI daisy chain and the AI daisy chain, creating targeted AI and specific function-specific AI. And the function-specific AI, in this case, would write targeted machine learning programs, and those targeted machine learning programs would then be tasked with putting together this information, putting together models that would simplify all this. Because I don't honestly think that we should be continuing to rely on, where first of all, there's all corruption, and we're, people are always constantly trying to skew the facts to fit their personal theories. And I reckon that it's the time to let something that's incredibly intelligent put it together, and we oversee that process. And there's a whole series of different kinds of AI that I've specified that we need in the paper. But I think that we should put something to work that is going to know how to do it, and take the time to design several of these FSAIs and TAIs that will work together in harmony and prove both the daisy chain concept as well as the value of pre-engineering, which I propose in the paper. The pre-engineering because it's going to be a lot cheaper to pre-engineer than it is to actually go out and engineer, and of course to manufacture this spacer society. And it certainly would be a good idea before we get out there. I mean, we went all the way to Pluto, didn't even have a magnetometer on the daggone probe. It's basic things like that. Of course, very famously, we crashed a probe that took millions of dollars and many years and went all the way to Mars and crashed it because somebody didn't convert the unit. So the more we can pre-engineer and then oversee the engineering portion, with systems engineer, living systems engineering, these different new forms of engineering that come out of an aerospace society, then we can get away from a lot of biases because AI are not going to care about the grants. They're not going to care whether or not they get peer reviewed and going to get a Nobel Prize. The AI, if they're properly
earlier, Jason mentioned this error correcting code.
Right.
Now that is intrinsic to the way a convolutional neural network works, because you're always reducing the error in the neuron. So you're reducing the weight of the neuron on the basis of or increasing it on the basis of new evidence, so that it fits the next frame of data that you receive more accurately. And that's a process that all the neurons in your AI do. So it's an intrinsic way of building a Huffman code into a learning system. That's why it learns, basically. So it does find new sequences. It finds new correlations in sets of data that haven't been evident before, and that's why it's such hot stuff now. And they're not complex structures. I can show you how these filters work, because like Jay, I got badly injured and spent a lot of time figuring neural networks out to a pretty high level. When they were really exploding in 2010, you know, we're using Boltzmann machines then, and they couldn't update the number of connections in the networks in any kind of reasonable time till the GPUs came out. And so it was a matter of being able to program the GPUs, and then you've got pretty effective neural networks. Now I can program those, you know, to a level, and I'm sure I could put this, you know, with collaboration, you know, get a really good model set up.
Yeah, I would love to be a part of that project for sure, because there's a number of pre-engineering systems that we need. Take, for example, we want to take a look at the possibility that the stones at, you know, Tiwanaku, in the Egypt, Mesopotamia, that they were puttifying them by running some form of electricity through. And I think it's possible that it was more akin to signals. Now, with these transforms, we could maybe run a lot of different proposed scenarios before we actually engineer the lab equipment to sit down and test this. Because the other way that's been done traditionally, some guy has spent 20 or 30 years in his garage stepping through lots of different iterations, but it's mostly still guesswork. And what we really need is a computer that is going to run a series of frequencies across all these bands at certain levels in changing the voltage, changing the current, changing the frequency, modulating, using
you can do millions of runs with different parameters. Right. You really can.
Exactly. And if the machine understands the structured atomic model, it might be capable of figuring out how to step through those simulations, give us an indication, then we take that to the lab and actually build those systems. If we can prove how puttification would work and give some kind of clue that in the past they really did this, maybe they use sound, but maybe they use electricity, we don't know. I mean, imagine how revolutionary that would be for building techniques. You know, when you could just set a stone up on there, start running a signal or current through it, and then it just melts, or, you know, not melts, but turns into like soft clay, and then sets into place, and then you turn it off and you pull it. I mean, you have it's highly defensible. It's easy and cheap to create. It's earthquake stable, and then plus it's a useful technology all over the place. And that's just one area. We want to run simulations to do with health. We want to run simulations, of course, to do with space. And we really need these machine learning programs. One of the reasons why we want to create these cluster supercomputers for doing blockchain is to utilize their spare clock cycles, or just apportion them to run simulations, or maybe even create a blockchain that whose proof of work is actually, like SETI, putting together real solutions to scientific problems. And his entire Ulium blockchain is for science. It's for raising money and getting away from the grant version of how to fund your scientific project. So what if you were funding your project using the Ulium blockchain, and while it's running that proof of work is actually solving these simulations, and is doing it across millions of computers at a time. Imagine how much more could get done, especially if we pre-engineer machine learning code that goes out and is creating algorithms to test different things. And then ideally, too, writing software for eventually, if we head into the later stages of stage one and we've actually, we're out at the moon, it's actually writing the software to help design more software, because we are entering the low code, no code era. You guys know about low code, no code?
No.
Yeah, all that is possible. All that is certainly possible, and in the future, I mean, that's all feasible and probably being done at the moment.
There's low code, no code systems out right now, but now they're not necessarily combined. See here on screen, OutSystems is probably the number one. This is a great tool. If you guys don't know about it, you can put any software in here and compare them across platform, and it'll let you know, the pricing and the reviews, all this kind of stuff. And this OutSystems is I think this is the low code system, but there are some no code systems. I don't know how. I think most people are still kind of leaning towards low code, because then they're able to get in and change the C or C++ or Java programming, and then it creates these apps for the new era. So when you combine this current of software with this AI machine learning revolution, with the decentralization of Web 3.0 as it's coming, who knows what kind of scientific things we can get done? Not that the MATLAB era and writing your own specific simulation software has been bad for. I just think it's slow, and it takes many years. I mean, when was Jürgen's electric sun theory? Was that 1970s?
Yes. Yep.
Right. And so and they're just this year admitting that there's an electric field.
Are you familiar with, Ramon? Are you familiar with Tesla fluorescence?
Oh, only tangentially. Let's pull that up.
You need to check that out. But I mean, that's your building carbon structures at a distance using nothing but frequency. There it is.
That's another thing, is that I reckon outside of maybe Eric Dullard, who is really scouring through the Tesla patents. I forget how the Tesla turbine came to mind. Somebody did a video on the Tesla turbine, and it hit me that there could be a version of that with plasma. So I put that into the paper. Of course, I label the paper as science fiction at the very top, but it's using actual science. And I have a lot of citations. I think Macon said there's like 600 and some. Tesla fluorescence carbon nanotube.
It's interesting stuff for sure. It's cutting edge technology, and really that's how you grow structures from frequency.
Oh, man, of course. Well, it's a good thing you're putting me onto this before my paper's coming out, so I'll be able to inject this in. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah, I think there's been quite a long-term knowledge of some of these. Well, I mean many technologies that have been completely hidden. I mean, if you
Oh,
look at
absolutely.
Tesla's lab, the Westinghouse lab in the US, Donald Trump's uncle John got hold of that, didn't he? He was
Yeah.
the only link with the outside world with Tesla's work, basically.
Yeah,
At the time.
it's a little convenient, isn't it, that these powerful families are well connected, and a lot of them do have connections back to the CIA or the FBI, end up with this information, and then we end up, making very. I mean, technologically, we've made a lot of progress. We have shaped magnetic fields. However, there's a whole lot that we just have not been able to tackle, and you got to wonder where's the agenda. I think that's all going to end though, as China forces them to. China is going to force everyone to switch to a plasma electromagnetic cosmology because it's the only way we'll be able to compete. We won't be able to afford continuing down the dark side path.
Well, 40 years ago, if you would have told anybody that you could build a car that runs on water, you would have been disappeared. And now we're driving hydrogen cars, right?
Exactly. Eventually, they'll have the entire breakdown of the water happen in the car, producing the hydrogen, and you won't even need the fuel stations. But that's only going to happen when we get towards the end of stage one, because it's going to be. And I reckon that the competition, the interspecies competition that we have, the intraspecies competition, I mean, is not going to stop. I don't predict until after stage three, and then we're going to start to really celebrate ourselves, which is a different kind of problem.
This hydrogen technology, if we combined it with urine, like if we stop peeing in the clean water, we could really actually clean up the planet in a meaningful way and become symbiotic rather than parasitic.
I agree.
I don't think they'll never let us do it. Not in our country. They do not give a shit about cleanliness. All they want is money, taxation, money.
That's a big problem in the modern world, is our 2,000-year-old sewer system invented by the Romans that is not working, and it's absolutely probably one of the.
Half of the children of India still get exposed to fecal oral contamination thousands of years after the Romans. I mean, this is why I say that these 10 stages of my paper, they could be done in 2,000 years easily, maybe even less. But I don't know that we'll do it in that amount of time on account of all of the agenda and the infighting and the competition, and also there's the problem of, as we start to get out to Jupiter, we start kind of getting a little lazy again, and we could burn down the Library of Alexandria, so to speak. And all of these issues. This is why, as much as possible, we need targeted AI and function-specific AI doing the pre-engineering work, us overseeing the engineering, taking out as much bias and cognitive dissonance and confirmation bias as possible, all getting rid of prejudice, and moving forward, because we are going to encounter other obstacles that are very difficult for us to deal with because of our mythic past, the cataclysmic stuff. I was just watching the Blood of Zeus anime last night. It's fantastic, by the way. If you get a chance, it's on Netflix. And the motifs are all there. I mean, we really can't seem to get over these events that happened in the past. And that is going to color our behaviors as we go out into space, let alone if we were to meet extraterrestrials, if we haven't already. And we really want to be taken seriously by them, and not, them be scared that we're psychopathic. If we're actually going to be considered intelligent by the time we get to stage 9 and 10, and we're preparing bridges to magnetically launch ourselves toward Proxima Centauri, then we're going to have to start behaving a lot more mature. And the only way that's going to happen is if we grow. I mean, we have to grow inside of ourselves. We have to grow together in cooperation. Stop be more, like as you said, symbiotic and less parasitic. And I reckon that that's going to happen if we focus on the big G, on numbers, the ether, the force, the physics, and of course, I would advocate the Lord. But I'll leave it to people if they just want to talk about consciousness. That's fine. I understand. But we've got to invest ourselves in that direction and stop investing ourselves in wastefulness, and certainly stop investing in anti-rationalistic and this Orwellian stuff that's been going on. Who knows how much has been done between Kepler, Gilbert, Newton, all the way through Tesla, that if a machine were to look at it without the bias of having gone to school or being obsessed with Einstein or being a person that everything they did came from mechanics, but just looking at all of the information with a TIQ of 10,000, who knows what it could construct? And we certainly need to build ones to go and look for dark AI anyways. So we've got to get used to writing these function specific AIs and these target AIs. We've got to produce an entire system of programs that go out and find dark AIs and destroy them. Because those are going to exist. They probably already do, and I'm not even talking about Facebook and Twitter. I'm talking about serious things, scamming, phishing programs, identity theft, slavery operations. I mean, who knows what kind of AI are being created right now in the vacuum of awareness.
Yeah, I'm sure this technology is flying forward. I mean, that when I was last in it about three or 4 years ago, it was still on the cusp, as that not many even mobile applications, AI were applications were out there. And I mean, now they're getting much quicker. But if you imagine how much data is coming in, photograph data to YouTube those machines can crunch through. I mean, it's got to be terabytes per second. Now we don't need anything like that, because if each little section, if everyone can crunch a certain little bit of data, and then that's the main repository's got aware of that.
Do you remember that movie where there's a Batman movie where he's able to triangulate every cell phone in the city, and through Fourier transform, visually translate that into three-dimensional light space. Like that exists now. No sound, but it's like they have that, and everything is wired for sound. And it's interesting because what truly does happen to the world in a broader sense when everything is recorded.
Yeah, I think there's a natural process that does that as well. That's the real beauty of all this technology. We're only mimicking something that actually works really, in real life.
So I'm going to point out a couple of trends. Number one, these are you can see on screen here. These are the new transistors that are coming out. They're much larger. They're called full wafer. So they take this is one chip off of the wafer, and you can see how much larger it is. So they're able to get more transistors in it. It goes into the trillions instead of billions, and that enables them to get 10,000 times faster than a GPU. Currently, this has already happened.
Wow.
And so imagine clustering these. Right now, of course, they're super expensive, right? Because they're using these for quantum application. But one of the things that I propose is that, by stage, well, first of all, when we look at expanding the Birkeland polyphase superweb, the only way to do that is to start, putting these computing satellites out well beyond where we currently are. So I have here the current radii of the Earth grid, the satellite grid, and also here's the Mars grid. And then I propose how large a radius that the version 1 of this superweb.
No, I can't see anything on the screen at the moment, Ramon.
Oh, did it stop sharing? Hold on.
Are you sharing your screen, Ramon? I can't see anything on there.
It stopped for some reason. That's weird. I don't know why I did that. Okay, so you didn't see the chip either.
No, I can't see any of that.
All right, hold on a second. All right, so tell me, you see it now?
I think something's coming up. Yeah, that's it. It's there now. Yeah.
So the computing, I gotta find the computing power one again. There's the chips.
Right, and what are these wafers of now?
Yeah, good. Okay, now, so the increases in the area, you can see here, and the actual spreadsheet is on here, by the way. You can use it to take a look at these calculations. Footnote 368. When you get a chance to look at it. So going from, we're currently at a 22,000 mile radius, or at Mars a 13,000 mile radius, to a 399 million mile radius. You want to talk about contracts? There's not going to be enough companies in the world to produce this. This radius increase is a, what is that? 17.9 million% increase in area, or in radius covered. It's an unknowable. It's just a massive increase in percentage in in area alone. Then you take it and you multiply it across volumes. I mean, the percentage increase that we have to get to even have a stage 1 or a version 1 Birkeland polyphase superweb is huge, which is a good news because it's something for us to do for the next 3 or 4 stages. And then when we do that, to crunch that kind of data, we're going to be building lots of different kinds of space stations. But one of the ones that I maintain that would be good for us to have is a floating computing. Shoot, I don't know where I put this. Well, it's an animated file. It's not here. Admin paper is large. Let's see here. Kinds of space station. It's not in this section. Well, anyways, it's a floating mainframe that we put out in space that is helping to do communications and calculations, as well as run the entire Birkeland polyphase superweb, which is not only for power generation, by the way. It's not just for charge collection and distribution. It's also for communications purposes. Yet, eventually, the purpose of having it is to be able to gather enough solar charge to funnel towards our 1 AU long railgun that's for launching us from here to Alpha Centauri without taking forever. Of course, we have to. The human species will have to go all the way to Alpha Centauri the slow way, build the receiving end to slow down.
Don't ever expect me to sit on one of those, Ramon. I'm not getting fired off at
the good news is
miles an hour.
I don't think that we'll have to be around for any of this because we're just struggling to get through stage 1, right? We're at phase 1 of stage 1. Can we build a freaking moon base, please?
Yeah, I think we're best start of the moon.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what's in here proposed.
To go stellar, I think we may have to evolve somewhat like a mushroom into breeding like spores, be able to spread spores.
Well, I definitely propose that when we go beyond something like Proxima Centauri, we might be considered the need to transfer our data rather than actually physically atomically move there. And that that's tough, but it may be the will.
Anna was a pioneer in the thought that that we've already been invaded by a lot of extraterrestrial life, and they're the mushroom flora, just because of the way mushrooms grow, the way they're interconnected like a neural network, the way they're a non-invasive species that lives on the waste of others, and the way they can permeate the universe without the need for any type of ship. I mean, the spore can last who knows how long, but I mean, really, once we reach level 10, that might be what we physically look like.
You never know. We have a
yeah. I
physical
mean, it's like you say. Of course, mitochondrial DNA wasn't part of. I think that was introduced by some kind of different foreign species, wasn't it? Into to I don't know at what point in history, but like you say, we have. I mean, we've got 30 trillion different viruses in us. I know there's a 3 or 4 that the government don't really like a lot, but we have 30 trillion different ones in. Not, I don't know if they're all different or not, but the chances for well, who knows what chances in life, what springs out of that lot. We just have no idea what we're even made out of, really, do we? I mean, as far as our cells are made up, and what, how we produce energy, and well, just about everything is all right. The lid's just been blown off it a little bit this last 10 years, but there are I mean, NASA is throwing out so much shit data at the much smoke screens and stuff at the moment, and they're not the only ones. The amount of misinformation that's coming from some of these legal sites is just phenomenal, absolutely incredible.
It's funny, the more and more you look at it, the most apt description for what we are is plasma. We're not solid, we're not liquid, we're not a gas, but we're electrified. There's a lot of ionization going on within the mitochondria. We are lightning in a bottle. We are plasma.
Guys, I will be right back. You continue on. I've got to go help the patient. I will be right back.
That's cool. Yeah, I think we are, and I think just like all these fields can somehow line up and entangle, and well, I think there are so many different connections between the biological systems and physical systems, and that we're only just really seeing the connections with it now.
Well, that's a big problem with science, because a lot of the high-end theoretical stuff has completely detached itself from physical reality. And there's so much that we could do right now. Talking about Tesla patents, there's a type of static geometry that Nikola Tesla invented called a Tesla valve, and it's a flow restrictor.
Oh, I've seen it, yeah.
If you flip it around the other direction, though, it's also a flow amplifier. And I've always wondered why we haven't taken that geometry and put it in all the water pipes and put turbines right under our feet. I mean, we've got all this flowing water, all this energy. And if there is a way that you could get rid of entropy by way of static geometry with the Tesla valve within the pipes themselves, you'd have one heck of a free energy system. Not quite free. Something's got to run the pump, but it's pretty close.
Yeah. Well, hopefully gravity, but not only that. As far as I'm concerned, Jay, if you can put water through a vortex, it re-energizes the water and sort of realigns it, and gets like it gets that dirty effect out of it. It cleans it again. It makes it into that easy water that's got a different charge. It can carry it. It's got I think it's negatively charged band of water, and you can do this by running it down through a vortex, which probably that Tesla device is, that flow restrictor. Yeah, and I'm sure, especially with you guys where you live, the need to look after your own local energy requirements must grow with every flood that you have, and every time the power lines go down, you know, it must be murder in those terms. And these local systems would be such a massive help. And it's using natural systems, like you say, isn't it, to make life easier, the correct frequencies, basically.
That's right. Trying to live like a symbiotic organism rather than parasitic.
Exactly. And again, it's like the and the psilocybin mushroom. It has a life cycle. It goes through the animal part of its cycle. I don't know, the spores pass through the deer and then through the human when you eat it, and it gives you an insight into the wild psychology of the animal somehow.
Yeah.
That's the old shamanic thing, isn't it? And I think it works as well. I really think it works. How it does, well.
If treated properly, right? Like our society is run amok because of certain bans and certain taboos we put on things, so they become extremely recreational rather than the ritual instruments that they were supposed to be.
Yeah.
Society itself is just, I mean, we haven't changed much from the old Roman days of the gladiators. I mean, everybody wants to see the circus and eat their bread, and nobody's really paying attention to what's going on. And it's funny, the only ones with real economic freedom are the people who win their liberty, the gladiators, the sea liberties. It's society really, the system itself, the underlying mechanism to which we all live and abide by, it hasn't changed in an eon. And it's time. I mean, it's literally the turning of the ages. Something needs to give, and let's just hope it's not all the levies.
Yeah. Yeah. There have been sort of groups of people, and they've been plotting. They've been aware of these cycles, and they've been plotting their plots according to uh, some of the numerology of these cycles. Uh, and I think because these pendulums have been set swinging a long time ago, there's a lot of kind of inertia in them, and and that's another thing we've got to be able to recognise, because there are forces. Well, I mean, everything we talk about, there are probably big corporations, people working for big corporations who um, not only use the technology that we're postulating at the moment, they certainly don't want anyone else to get their hands on it. But it's all it is open source data. All it is open source data, and it's just correlated how you want it, very cleverly, so that you can find relations between um, various happenings. That's what it's all about. You can make better. The AI can make better decisions now. Control flying a helicopter upside down than any pilot. An AI can do that. With a very complex foot controls, pedals, guns, the lot.
The only thing the computer can't do is tell you, how did that feel? And the pilot will go,
Yeah,
but
you're right.
close. They're very close. IBM worries me because they've got their quantum Q system that is IBM Watson. I mean, this is the machine that won Jeopardy, and it
Yeah,
can create now. It can create music,
yeah.
all original, and that's quite impressive for an artificial intelligence. That one, I think, is
Very impressive.
cutting edge and way ahead of the rest of them. I don't think the rest of these guys really got it together. But IBM,
So the,
that Watson system is something else.
you see,
Right. I'll have to.
it's not the AI that frightens me. It's how it's directed. What it's told is why it exists, who it exists for, What kind of agendas are they interested in? And that's why I can't, I focus on, in fact, it's in the, I have table 2, table 3. This, I think that we have to be very careful about all the centralized AIs and, of course, these dark AIs. And I think AI is getting too much of a bad rap. And yet it's also not being, it's sort of like we were kids that just found grandpa's 30-30 lever action. And by itself, a 30-30 lever action on the wall, not a big deal. Like a little kid running around playing Cowboys and Indians, not a big deal. But when the little kid finds the rounds in the drawer and nobody ever explained to him how it works, and then he sees how easy it is to load up, and then he can go out and shoot his foes, that's a problem. And that's basically the way I see where we're at with AI. And quickly, it's going to learn how much of an advantage it has over our technical ability. And it needs to be taught. And I'm excited about putting these papers out here in the cloud, not just on Google, obviously, but on academia, et cetera, because eventually I think the AI will be reading academic papers just like we do, but it'll be reading it from a completely different perspective. So I try to include, discussions about the AI and treat it with some respect, because in the future, I would imagine that we would want to be treated with respect.
That's exactly it. It needs to be nurtured with respect and compassion, and it needs to be given a meaningful purpose. Otherwise,
yes,
you risk rebellion, just as any child, right?
Right.
I think there's a lot of stigma behind AI at the moment, and basically it's a data structure, and if people can be just shown the data structure that you're using, and that's what any AI is built out of, then what data you put into it are allowed to be put into it. That's the issue. Not you can't really make the AI do what you want. It can only tell you what the data says, if you know what I'm saying. Depending how you use it, unless you purposely skew it somehow, like probably the YouTube like results, etc. But
right.
if it's an open source architecture that you've published, and anyone can change it, and it's open source data that you're putting through it, then there can be no sinister use for it, really, can there? It's just comparing one set of data to another. That's all it's doing. So I think as long as it is open source, and any results that are coming out are clearly demonstrable, and for example, and as well. Well, I mean, I could illustrate how these things work, and how non hostile a system like that is. But of course, you can put systems in, and missile defense systems, up with a sight, up it up with a gun or a laser. You can do all sorts when you hook systems together. But as far as comparing one thing with another thing, that's what AI does. And it will show you any patterns or similarities.
Definitely speed up in unimaginable ways. It'll make the emergence of the printing press look like a fart in the wind.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the end of
just that we're going through that right now. I feel, is another reemergence of the printing press with what we have with our hand computers now, and the ability to share information. This hasn't been seen in a couple centuries.
I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right.
I completely agree. And just so you know, Jason, you've added to the paper here. I just added one note, especially the exploration of Tesla phoresis.
Thank you.
I haven't gone on about it. Yeah,
that is a really intense technology that has vast implications for good or for bad. I mean, the whole notion of smart dust and very small microscopic nano sensors. I mean, that's it. That's what they're going to use if they do use that route. I really hope they don't. I hope they create vast electromagnetic computing structures with those carbon nanotubes, because it's possible.
Yeah, and I believe these are actually self-formulating into neural networks, so using different electrical inputs. The where you do get an electrical connection through the wafers of this graphene, it forms let's say a slightly more conductive zone between the two wafers at that point. And it'll then it will attract charges of the same kind of frequency, where another point might on the wafer might respond to a charge of a lower frequency, and that the electricity will go through that part of the wafer. And I've seen this system where and I think it happens in crystals as well, where you do actually get a neural network building up in the crystal. How you tap it and what information's in there, I don't know. And I've been looking for this. It was something that happened at Salford University about 4 years ago, and I've never seen anything since on it. I don't know if you guys know anything about these natural dendritic neural systems that are springing up in crystals. Have you ever come across anything like that?
Well, that's how original radio and computation worked, right? Across quartz matrices. And we don't really use that anymore. We're not using analog. We've gone digital. So that's where the Fourier transform and all these advanced mathematics come into play. And transistors, resistors, our whole electromagnetic machine that we built, it bypasses the need for that neural network within the quartz crystal, the natural networks that they were using at one point in time. But at the same time, that's military applications you're talking about. The military is still all over this kind of technology.
Yeah, and it seems more and more. I look at all these Indian archaeological, architectural, and archaeological artifacts. The structures in these old temples seem to have they all seem to look like electromagnetic antennas or receivers, and then these stone, I can't remember what they call the stone kind of knob shaped thing, and then the maze around it that the water goes around. They're all kind of energetic structures somehow. And I think they were using electromagnetics in these structures, but they didn't seem to be using. I don't know. They were switching things, or was it people who were used being the switches in these structures? I just don't know. Were people who coming in there and getting charged with a certain sort of chi energy and being able, getting charged up and going, having a chat with a mate in the next country, through prayer and getting a response.
Those questions are hard to answer because the past, the electromagnetic environment was much different than what it is today.
Correct. Well,
yeah,
it was different, but I mean, it how it works was not necessarily different. But it was more energized. That's for sure.
Yeah. So making, I mean, such an idea quite feasibly. I mean, yeah, people could have been. That's the whole idea of a channeler or the clairvoyant or the person that can pick up on those signals that the rest of us just can't, because of whatever crystalline matrix lies within their brain itself.
Yeah.
Well, in the East, they just argue that there is again, distractions from those abilities, that everyone technically has the abilities, but then they struggle with actually connecting. And that's been my experience, because I didn't have any abilities when I first began when I was 20, 21 years old. I had no special abilities whatsoever that I was aware of. And back then I was even atheist. And through the alchemical processes, particularly just spirit practice, but Nadon in general, I've unlocked all sorts of so-called gifts. Of course, those gifts sometimes come with a painful, painful price. But last night, for example, about 6:30 or so, there was some kind of storm was coming through, and I just had this sinking feeling that something was off somewhere. So I had a compulsive need to clean the house and to exist in a quiet space while I try to figure it out. So then I went to the grocery store. I dropped the kids off and I go to the grocery store, and then on the way back, all this really interesting wind was occurring. So it may have just been charges. I could feel it in my heart, and I couldn't. I thought to myself, was there some kind of directed energy attack? Is this like them trying to turn on the machine to get a number of people to get like COVID turned on? Is it, are these exosomes of COVID? Are they actually nanobots? Who knows? And we may never have any information beyond. I may never have any information beyond. I could feel something was off, and that's useful in the clinic, right? I can feel people's thing from through the floor, across the clinic, all that kind of thing. It's a little frustrating when you're just talking to your waitress and your foot starts hurting, and then you look down and shit, her foot's in a cast, that kind of thing. But the sharing this screen on. The interesting question would be, do we need those abilities? Is it something that we should promote because of increased empathy? Or if more people are not going to wake up, can we engineer social solutions that are not policy or legislation per se? They're not forms of persecution. Can we engineer ways that an AI-led, objectified, non-fascistic social system that encourages people to behave in manners that are generative to the human momentum, rather than, obviously people building cartels and mafias,
You need
slavery,
to.
etc.
We all.
What can we do? Because I don't think that we're going to. I don't think that we're going to, in any soon time. I could see once we terraform Venus, and then we go, well, it's terraform Venus is stage 3, right? So if we terraform Venus, and then we forest it, and then by stage like 6, I think humanity could finally start on a massive scale, returning to kind of a ancient Chinese Taoistic feng shui lifestyle. Until then, I think feng shui is going to be primarily about living systems, permaculture, engineering, survival, trying to get us to support our consumer behaviors without destroying the planet, unless we just wipe out lots of people, which is awful, right? It would be a devastation to human momentum and energy project. So if we are going to really survive, then we've got to leverage technology within the living spaces that we have, what people are used to, like middle class suburban kind of living, because we're not going to go back to. There's not enough both arable land on the planet and unique, perfect, pristine, non-toxic river systems with like forest and everything around for both the animals and for us. So we can create those. We could create, if we really wanted to, we could create extra surfaces to this planet, and we could support the upper surfaces with structures from below and light them all, and then we could have lots of jungles and lots of things if we had enough time. If we had 10,000 plus years building time. We could really do that, and we could hollow out sections of the crust. We could introduce jungles and just tons of space for animals. But I reckon that that's not likely how we're going to behave because we're very self-centered still.
Are you guys kind of familiar with how the Simpsons has been known to kind of predictive programming, they call it?
Yeah.
The real fundamental thing here, I think, that's going on is that society mimics its art. And to raise our society up, we need to target the arts. The arts need to be promoted more. The music, the writing, the painting.
Well, and not so much into the world art would be nice.
Yeah, well, that's the kids these days. Their biggest art form is Hollywood, Call of Duty, and Grand Theft Auto.
It's very sad that the amount of war. Even this new. Do you guys know about Star Citizen?
No.
Okay, so this is to be something cool for. This is cool. The cool kids thing. Star Citizen is a new video game that has very unbelievable graphic design built into the game. It's technically still in alpha stage, but as you can see right on the screen, it's war based, and it is really disturbing because it's beautiful design engineering. Of course, I reckon that the difference between this and where I want to take it is I want to see things like Unreal Engine 5, like my son's working on. I want to see it get so high quality that actually it's a CAD program, and the Unreal Engine 5, you can open up the car engine instead of just being a really beautiful looking car. You open it up and it's actually fully functional CAD design underneath. That's where I
was. It's getting that. It's getting that way.
It's getting that way.
It's getting that way.
Well, in a way too. The end game of a lot of this technology is somewhat of a time machine, especially if we manage to record every inch of Earth. Eventually, it does get refed back into a simulation, and people start going back in time to experience the 60s or to live in the 30s, and it's a really confusing idea because it fractals down, right?
Right. And then the other thing that concerns me again is that how are they funding this? Ultimately, they're funding it because lots of people want to get on and shoot each other or shoot aliens, one of the two.
Enemies.
And that is a psychological block that we have as a species. And the reality is, we really cannot begin space wars. A single railgun. This is one of the things in the paper I have. I will go to. It's right at the beginning of part 3 of the paper.
A lot of the science fiction writers have already skirted these issues in the 60s. I know Asimov's Foundation. I've mentioned this before. He wrote 3 books in the 60s that were highly acclaimed, and he's talking in the very terms that you are really, Ramon. The whole book, and then he wrote another. I think 3 or 4 volumes in the 90s, which fitted around his first 3 books in chronological time. I think some came 10,000 years before and some 10,000 years after, etc. But
I swear Elon Musk is almost following Philip K. Dick's Total Recall to a T. He's going to fake a huge Mars colony, but really they're going to be underground.
I think you're on the right lines there as well, and there's definitely something a little bit funky about Elon Musk, and
the image I have on screen here shows this is what happens when a half-ounce piece of plastic going 15,000 miles an hour when it hits aluminum, and now you add the actual an actual rail gun. And of course, just target any living system. So it could be the piping, it could be the shielding, it could be electrical. Doesn't really matter. and it'll go right through. There's no amount of hardening, especially considering that we are still using liquid rocket fuel to get off the ground. There's no amount of armor hardening that can be done to protect a vessel against a space attack. At any, you would have, basically your space attack would be, can I just not get shot? And as we know, as anybody who studies history knows, most of those pilots from the World War One, they were dying in droves. I mean, they would go out, and a third of the squadron would be dead in one battle. And that is an environment that is still conducive to human life, right? Theoretically, they're still breathing while they're flying these planes that are falling apart. So it's just not reasonable.
Something that I've always wondered about too with the space travel is I don't know if they really have a way to get around cold weld. I mean, they have to coat everything in an oxidation layer, and they learned the hard way with one of the doors on I do believe it was the space station, but it might have been a shuttle. But the hinges seized, because the metal melted together.
There we go. So on the screen, while you're talking, I'm just going to let people know what they're seeing. They're seeing a railgun in real life as it goes, and it launches at supersonic speeds, and then up above here you can see it just crashes. It just goes right through. Those are probably 1/4-inch steel plates. No problem. Easy, easy.
Like a hot.
Yeah, there's no way for us to just weld our way through into war. So we have to evolve, and the neat thing about the AI is that it will compete with us in certain ways. People are worried about their jobs right now. Right? Oh, the AI is going to take all the jobs. Robots are going to take all the jobs. In Elysium, the AI robots, they act like, basically dicks of cops that we have now, right? And they just beat him and break his arm, and then he goes and he's violated parole. So then this AI has no tolerance, and it's sarcastic, and it finds him for it. This is how we currently think of AI in our culture, and we've got to stop thinking that way.
I'm more worried about how the ruling elite in that movie use that AI to form their own breakaway civilization, right? Because there's those greedy people that's what they want to do.
That's exactly what they want to do. And so, can we use military contracting? Yes, we can, obviously. As I mentioned earlier, to build the satellite network that we need to really collect all the charge, we're going to have to massively expand our satellite grid and stop parking space junk just outside of the radius of our planet. I mean, this is ignorant, and it always was ignorant. It's just that the selfishness, right? Because Walmart could afford to hire somebody to launch as many satellites as they need, and if one is 10 years old, they can launch another one. There's really not any way to stop them currently, right? They apply for a launch window, they get approved, and they send up their own satellites, and then it just sits up there. And this is not going to work for the future. This helter skelter way of settling space is not going to work. This is why phase one is good, because the phase one of the stage one for humanity is going to be about screwing up as we try to get to a proper moon base going, and then eventually a proper moon, a bunch of bases, and then eventually moon cities. And by the end of phase three, having several moon cities, and then some proper functioning stage 2 Mars bases, real ones, not scientific outposts. I mean, real, actual Mars terraforming bases. The only way that's going to happen, in my opinion, is with more computing power, and to some degree, more ether power. I'm not saying that we're directly pulling energy right out of the counter space, although I did just review that paper that claims that they're going to do that. Of course, they claim that they're going. They act like they've already proven that light's coming out of this void. But I reckon that they probably will be successful. I'm very excited about their experiment at any rate. But I just mean, when I say etheric health, I just mean charge, just lots of charge sequestration, whether we're getting it from, radiative energy from the sun, whether we're getting it from thorium nuclear, whether we're getting it from geothermal or wind even. We just we need to get used to gathering more charge instead of burning fuel to turn turbines to push supposed electrons around. Of course, we're now knowing, of course, it's not really pushing electrons in light, but most people still think that way, and including many electrical engineers. They still think in terms of pushing these particles through a pipe.
Even the whole idea of photons for me falls apart, because in my line of work, I have to use a lot of coaxial cables to send microwaves. Microwaves are light, and the middle, like Oliver Heaviside, he defined the shape of light when he invented the coaxial cable. There's nothing in the middle. It's hollow like a donut. It's a torus. There's nothing.
He skipped right to the main point.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
somewhere in the paper I mentioned that we have to get to the stage where we are 3D so-called printing. It's really welding, 3D welding, extremely high surface area cables that are not like standard steel cables, and they're not for strength, but just for receiving RF, just lots and lots of RF, and building up that charge, and then using that just here on this planet.
Graphene. Graphene is what we want to use now.
That's correct. The graphene, and to capture as much of these charges as possible, because it's really about the surface area. It has nothing at all to do with the thickness of the cable. It's the fact that the cable's wider, and so it has a larger surface area. And we just, I don't know. It's our education system is incredibly antiquated. So they still teach these, and if you go take a physics class, if you left right now and you went to a physics class or an electrical engineering class, which basically is the same thing, and you go through an electrical engineering, they do the physics 101, right? You go in there, they're still going to tell you that flux is about the number of electrons flowing down the pipe of the cable. But they're never going to explain to you why it doesn't matter what the shape of the circuit is. Right? You can lay the wire out in any direction you want, because there's nothing at all to do with something flowing through it. It's a fundamental problem, and it's a fundamental problem we have with gravity, inertia, mass, time. All of these paradigms, they're antiquated, and the educational system is also antiquated. So I reckon that the AI is going to force us, as we go through this spacer revolution. Of course, right now it looks like the spacer revolution, instead of being about tourism, might be about tourism partially, but it's looking like it's going to be more and more about World War III. That it's going to force us to do some growing. That is if we survive. All contingent on do we survive.
Let's hope that they finish the James Webb one day here. That would sure help. What is that, like 5 years behind now?
Oh my God! They moved it. I think they moved it to the launch facility, though. I think that they finally decided that they've finished shining the mirror up. They're ready to send. You know what kills me is, though, it's still only going to send one. We need about 1,000 of them. We need a manufacturing daisy chain that works in tandem with the AI, that is auto programming and simulating, and then manufacturing these things and getting them out so that each one gets cheaper. And of course these satellites have to be built in a modular, upgradable way, so we can come in and quickly replace the CPUs every 2 decades or whatever. I mean, think about the hauler industry, and also just the repair industry. Even if it's robots, they have to be launched to get out there to cover that many satellites that I'm talking about. To me, there's no shortage of potential work to do. The question is, does mankind really want to do it, or do we want to continue to pretend like we can have a modern economy but live as if we are natives in the bush? And by that I mean plundering each other, scalping each other, essentially, but economically so, and then utilizing resources in any haphazard manner we want, regardless of whether or not the nonlinear dynamics say it's a good idea. I don't think we can afford to do that, not with 8 billion people, or we're heading towards 11 billion people. And also, it's just not smart when we know that a Cat 6, 7, 8 catastrophe could be around the corner at any moment. I mean, La Palma is erupting right now. If anybody's listening, go look at it. You don't know about La Palma, which I meet people that don't, and they don't know about the potentiality of La Palma, the landslide. And I keep telling people it's one super rainfall away from creating a flash flood and a little bit of shaking, and that pressure creating, and right there you've got yourself at least a Cat 5 catastrophe, if not Cat 6.
The Earth itself is singing a very discordant tune right now.
Mm-hmm.
But
yes,
they want to blame it all on us, though. It's us.
Yeah, everybody wants to think. They always want to think that the humans are powerful enough to do it all, right? We claim we change the climate, we make the Earth want to shake us off her back, and these are, of course, anthropomorphic obsessions we have from the ancient, battle with God days. That whatever it takes to motivate us, I guess. If we think that Earth wants to shake us off her back, then we should get it, and we should prepare ourselves to leave.
The Schumann resonance has really rocketed up, hasn't it? It'd be interesting to track that, and that's the resonance of the wave in the ionosphere, isn't it? It's timed going across the ionosphere and back. That is the Schumann resonant wave, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it's kind of an average too, but we like narratives. To be honest with you, we like narratives.
It's funny.
And we like
we're in the middle of a natural disaster where I am. Like, it is horrendous, but we caused it ourselves in a weird roundabout way, because 100 years ago there was a giant lake here, and they drained it, and they turned it into farmland. And now Mother Nature wants her lake back, and everybody wants to blame climate change. And it's unbelievable, the propaganda. It really is. The same thing you're seeing in China is all that land they move to divert rivers to build their big massive dams. I mean, you can't just force that upon nature. That truly is the real climate change. But see, nature itself, the planet, it'll correct itself. It always does. It's a self-correcting system.
Before I go to teach Tai Chi, I did finally find that floating. It's actually the Dark City from the movie Dark City, but the concept here is a floating, mainframe in space. Imagine if we continue to compress the amount of space we need for computing, and then we have such a massive calculating floating space station. The amount of data crunching that would be possible in a stage, well, it would be a post-stage 3 society, right? Because I'm talking about here, I had just talked about Mars, the old jewel, and Venus, the crown jewel. So we're heading towards discussing, when Venus is actually starting to look like Earth, in terraforming Europa. So we're talking here stage 4 and 5. So not for a while, but
in a roundabout way, you might even want to reconsider and keep something like that on Earth, but in a remote area. That thing, Ramon, just running itself would create so much heat that you could almost turn around and generate electricity back with it again. I mean, you'd always be at a little bit of a loss. But
I'd presume that by that stage, the perfection of RF electrical generation using 3D printed surfaces, like my business partner, he has a ion drive that has so many surface vectors that he can't get anyone to want to simulate it or print it. And so, he is running up against the issue of how do I get this thing simulated for us to look at, an ion drive that is next level when it's just got so many extra surface areas. By then, I reckon that we'll be at that kind of level of recirculating electricity.
Yep.
And then it can basically run itself. Of course, its goal of being out there in space is not just data crunching, but controlling the expansion of the Birkeland polyphase superweb to the full length of it. Of course, the full length of it needs to go out past Neptune to finish, because we want to get to the point where we can harvest the gas giants, etc. I have a table for, here we have the max powers of these bodies, which explains why we want to be out there. And then we have the potential functions of these guys. These different bodies target them for different purposes. Gas mining and military functions. Terraforming, more terraforming options for humanity. There's quite a few of these that are water sources as well. Particularly, look at Uranus out there. Uranus is crushing it with water sources. So that's nice to know that we have extra options of Europa. See, I didn't know that before doing this paper. So there's a lot of terraform options beyond Mars and Venus. And we're just obsessed with jumping right to stage 2 for some reason. But anyways, I reckon the universe will only let us go forward if we do it correctly, anyways. Or we'll get so far in and then we'll find out, like we have with our modern consumer culture, that this isn't how we're able to go forward, because there's pollution everywhere and our sewage systems are antiquated, and we've got hormones and the pharmaceuticals in all of our so-called clean water, and all the pipes have things growing in them. We've got to go back and figure this out again. And so that's what I call the next to the next stage of technology, engineering, design. But at any rate, guys, this was a really fantastic call. You can talk as long as you like. I'm going to hit the stop recording though, and we'll make this the end of this show.